Welcome to the Practicing Drummer Podcast. My name is Craig, and in this episode, I'm bringing you a conversation I had with Colin Stranahan near the end of April 2023. Based out of Brooklyn, Colin plays and tours with a wide range of artists and is a member of Kind Folk, Real Feels, and the Stranahan Zaleski Rosato Trio. I really love Colin's playing and had a great time talking to him. You can check the show notes for links to some of the things we mentioned in the episode. And with that, let's get right to it. Hey, Colin, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great to sit down and chat.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed more recently on your Instagram, which is very cool, is the return of the Skynap series.
Oh.
You've been traveling more and posting your airplane shots, which is really great.
Well, it feels good to be posting those again. You know, it's always funny, and I always get funny responses. Some people don't really enjoy them, but most of the people enjoy them, or they're like, I'm just tired of seeing you sleep on a plane. But yeah, I'm just really happy to be back and playing music around the world. It's what I love to do. So
yeah, and I know the pandemic was pretty different for you. I know you got out of New York and you went back to Denver.
Yeah, I had a house where I could practice and play all the time, and I was doing quite a bit of teaching out there. So
nice.
It worked out. It was a little break during the dark periods, and so yeah, now I'm back in New York.
Did you find that your practicing changed at all during the pandemic, or your reason for practicing changed? I know mine did. I went through a point where I was like, what am I even practicing for? And it became more about mental health for me and just the routine.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, it was interesting. I started to, it's hard to say before the pandemic, but really before the pandemic, I noticed when I'd be on the road and just kind of going nonstop all the time, I'd always say to myself, like, oh man, I really wish I had the time to get this together or do that or spend some more time on this. And so I really went back when we had that time, and I just said, what are some things that I really want to focus on in my own playing and sort of check out and either revisit or visit and just for the first time. And so, yeah, my practicing did change a lot. I actually went back and started to listen to some recordings of myself, which is really hard to do. And I don't generally do that too much. I like to keep things moving, but I kind of stopped and just said, okay, let's just like a general, where am I at? And I was like, oh, I just noticed some things I wanted to change. Like, oh wow, I wish I had more dynamic range with the bass drum, or I wish I could get around the kit a little easier this way or that way. Just little details. So it was very detailed practice at first. And then I just kind of started to play around, just play to recordings of music. You know, I have an old iPod from back in the day and threw that on shuffle, and I just started playing along to music and found a lot of joy doing that. So I kind of focused on doing that for a long time, you know.
Yeah, so that's one thing I wanted to ask you about is the idea of playing along with records, because you also, I've seen you talk about, I think it was maybe in your Elite Music Mentor course, you also talk about playing the song. So you're playing without albums. So when you're playing with an album, what's your approach to that? Are you trying to imitate the drummer and cop some of the things that are played exactly, or what's your take on that right now in this?
Yeah, not so much imitate, but emulate. And emulate in the sense of like understanding where that specific drummer or band is putting the time and how it feels. You know, I played with a lot of groove music, a lot of funk music, during that time, and still am. And it kind of ranges from like, okay, one song will be like Count Basie, a big band record, and then it'll be like the Beatles, and then it'll be, like some hip hop stuff. Or so yeah, I'm really just trying to emulate the energy and the music and the feeling, and just sort of place myself within that music that I'm listening to. And so I'm not necessarily playing along and playing exactly what the drummer might be playing, but just more of the feeling and sort of trying to understand, like, oh, well, what kind of sound are they getting out of the cymbal, or just so a little more emulating than imitating, I would say. Yeah.
What about the form of practice that you do where you actually do play songs
Yeah.
on the drums. I
Uh,
think the one example I saw in the video, you were playing a blues form,
uh-huh.
right? Starting simple, making sure the form was present the whole time. Do you do that just with song forms or with the actual songs and melodies as well? How does
Yeah.
that fit into your practice?
Great question. Yeah. So I have started to do, I'm kind of working on some solo playing right now. And through playing solo, what I would like to do is, especially in like a jazz situation, for lack of a better term right now, improvised music is to play some jazz standards and make a solo performance out of me playing the melody, the form, soloing over it, playing time, sort of comping for myself. And so I've been just really kind of experimenting and doing solo performance and playing some of these songs, you know.
Is that a project you're planning on recording or gigging with, or
I'm
is it
not
just
sure at this point. It might be a recording I try to do, and I have some ideas for some solo stuff where it wouldn't just be that, but this would be a part of it. Yeah, maybe on a couple tunes, and it's been fun to take maybe like little sections from different songs and sort of just kind of vamp over those and develop some ideas, and then go into the song. And so, yeah, it
mm.
feels like because it's kind of a daily thing right now. I feel like it's turning into what could be maybe a recording at some point.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very cool. And is that, do you have a set of tunes that you're working on, or is it just kind of random how you're feeling each day?
Yeah, well, how this particular idea really started was, Wayne Shorter recently passed away, and he was somebody who I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with. When I went to the Monk Institute in New Orleans for 2 years, and
Yeah, yeah.
he was teaching there, and I was on the road when I found out he passed, and that particular day I was in Los Angeles, and we got to the venue really early, and so I just kind of started sitting down. I like sat down, I got set up for the gig, and then I just started playing through some Wayne tunes, and I was like, man, this would be really cool to develop into like a solo drum thing, and then maybe even take it a step further and maybe like you know, track drums over different drums, kind of layered tracks of different things. So yeah, it just kind of sprouted. I don't know if it'd be a tribute to him, but it's certainly in line with the music that I've learned of his, and it could turn into some sort of tribute to Wayne Shorter project, solo drum project, which is kind of out there. But yeah, it's just kind of been a stream of conscious ideas where it's like his music in particular, just because it's so melodic and well, it's just so great. There's so many things that you can do with those tunes. Like just kind of mess around, and so it's been really fun. So yeah, maybe it does turn into a new project. We'll see.
Oh, that's a really cool idea. And it reminds me too that you're a great composer as well. Are you still writing original
Yeah,
music?
yeah. No, I still write some music, and I since the pandemic I haven't really been playing too much of it. I have a trio with Glenn Zaleski and Rick Rosato, and we still
Oh
play
yeah.
together. I still try to write for that trio, and so we have played a few things, but I'm always coming up with stuff, and I've been writing a little bit, but yeah, I am gonna try to do another project of just my own music too. So sort of gearing up to try to write some stuff and experiment with some different ways of composing, away from the piano and see if I can come up with some new things. Yeah.
What has your writing process been like in the past?
Yeah.
I think I read in an interview that sometimes you'll start on the drums and sort of reverse engineer a composition,
Yeah,
but you also
exactly.
play piano.
Yeah. I like to play piano. I don't play it well, but a lot of times I would just start with playing some chords on the piano and would sort of gravitate towards something and then kind of mess around with that and then come up with a melody. There was a certain point when I actually, after a sort of lesson I had with Wayne Shorter, where he, in a very deep way, sort of I played something on piano and he said, okay, I want you to leave this room. The lesson lasted like 15 minutes long. It was very short. And all he said to me was, okay, great. Like, I want you to leave the room and go buy a book of manuscript paper. And he said, go and write melodies for a year. Just write melodies on a piece of paper. Don't think of bar lines. Don't think of chords. Don't think of harmony. Just think about writing a melody every day. Try to write a melody every day. And then he said to me, put the book away for a while and then go back to it after some time and then start to look through your melodies and then start to think about harmony and maybe even rhythm. And at the time I was like, okay. But now I realize all these years later, that was his way of basically saying you need to break away out of your normal way of composing. And because I would write in all these like 8-bar phrases, and it would be everything would be very even and not sort of driven by melody, but more harmony and chords or a chord cycle I would come up with. So it was deep. That was one of the deepest music lessons I've ever had, and that's all it was. But it was like very Jedi in the way that Wayne was, where it was like, here's some information. I'm not going to explain it all to you, and hopefully you'll find the way. And I feel like I have figured that out. And so a part of that has been, how do I start composing from the drums? Whether it's just like a groove that starts or maybe a melody I'm creating on the drums, but how can that be like the beginning of something? And it's worked out on a few tunes. There's a new project I play with. We're called Kind Folk,
Oh,
and
yes. I love that
um,
group.
oh,
The
thanks, man.
instrumentation is really great.
Yeah, it's super fun to play with that instrumentation too. And so this was actually during the pandemic, and Alex Larray, the alto player, and I sort of we co-wrote a tune on there where basically the tune is based off of two different grooves I came up with, and we were saying like we wanted that to be the melodic material and the sort of basis of the tune, and then everything around it would be what changes, and so it kind of goes between these two grooves, and it was a really fun way to compose. So I hope to do some more of that from the drums first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And going back to your lesson with Wayne, do you still have the manuscript paper and the melodies you
Yeah, I do. I do have that book. Yeah.
do you
And I
revisit it
have,
often? Have you composed
I
from it?
a little bit. It's still, yeah, not as much as I would like to, but it's still very much, I'm thinking about it every day, and I do look at the melodies quite often. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a whole, life's worth of stuff I could do with that. And I still have like hours and hours of him talking about stuff, and I'm just lucky to have spent so much time with him. It was incredible.
Yeah, that is so incredible. And but I want to go back to kind of your early years because
Yeah, sure.
I know you started playing really young, um,
Yeah.
8 years old.
Uh-huh.
And what I found interesting from what I read anyway is that at 8 you sat down at the drums and you could kind of just play. And
Yeah.
what does that actually mean? Like, were you were you immediately able to play like Ringo? Which
So it actually goes back even further because both of my grandfathers played drums in a way. One of my grandfathers played like a lot of big band music, swing music. And so when I was around 3 years old, I was spending a lot of time with him and he was showing me stuff on the drums. My other grandfather was more of like he played like sort of marching band stuff and I think at a certain point had a lot of rudiments together from what I understood, but I don't really remember a lot of that. And then my father is a saxophone player, so I grew up a lot around music. And my dad was a band director, a high school band
oh
director,
yeah, yeah.
and middle school band director as well. And so, I did have some drums around, and so I remember. I don't remember being three and playing, and I mean, I could probably hit stuff, but I didn't know what I was doing. But I just remember being introduced to like the Beatles, when I was around 8, and I would go to my dad's school and I would sit down, and the thing that was funny was I would grab the hi-hat and I would put it on the other side because I'm left-handed, and
Hmm.
so just for some reason that my feet didn't feel right if I sat down with my right foot at the bass drum. It felt more comfortable if I had my left foot on the bass drum. So I could play some just some of those like backbeat grooves that I heard by ear. I wasn't like I wasn't have like crazy chops or anything, but
Yeah.
I feel like I really understood the instrument, a little bit, and it was from that moment I was like, I really want to start learning about this, and my dad was like, all right, let's do it, and so I got to study with someone who I've still remained very close to, and that's Paul Romaine, who's a great incredible drummer in the Denver scene. And it's crazy because his father was a saxophone teacher, and he taught my dad saxophone lessons.
Oh,
And
wow.
here I am, like all these years later, studying with his son, and
Oh,
so
that's
it's
an
like a
amazing
generational
connection.
thing. It's really crazy. And hopefully, if I ever have kids one day, they could study with Paul's kids.
So do you
But
remember what kind of stuff you were working on early on?
yeah, from that time on, like I started to listen to jazz, and I remember hearing, like Miles Davis Kind of Blue for the first time. And from that moment on, we just started working on playing jazz, learning about swing and just like I just was a sponge. I just wanted to get a hold of as many records as I could and just listen to them. And so it really shifted. So before that, it was more of like I was into to rock and the Beatles, and like I have older sister who was always showing me really cool music like Radiohead
Oh,
and
cool.
Bjork and all sorts of stuff. But I really just primarily started focusing on jazz at that point. It's what I wanted to do. And I was in elementary school, and I got transferred into a really great jazz program at elementary school, and so that's what really sort of
Oh, wow. At
started
that
to
young of an
shift.
age, huh?
Yeah, I was so lucky to have been in a really good program at that young of an age and be exposed to these musicians like Paul Romaine, and Ron Miles was another huge influence who I
Oh,
met
yeah.
early on. And these were people coming into an elementary school working with people. So I just was so lucky to have had those opportunities early on to be around those people and to learn about it. And it was like I never looked back. It was like, yeah, I want to play jazz music. That's where it kind of started. So
Yeah, and you were always, I mean, that's the one thing I get from listening to you and reading about your history is you were always, I think of you more as a musician than I do a drummer, even though
mm,
you're very accomplished as a drummer and your touch is incredible and you,
thanks, man.
but what I'm wondering about your early development, was it always about playing with music and with other people, or were you also because you have an incredible facility, right? And that can come from just playing a lot. But were you also getting your snare drum stuff together, doing the usual coordination stuff? Was there anything unique that you worked on during that time?
I wouldn't say unique. I was definitely at that time. So I was starting to get to play with other people, but there was that other part where I was at home and just working on my own, and I'd be bugging my dad all the time to play just duo saxophone drums, like I wanted to do that, but there was this whole other world that I hadn't started to learn yet, and that was, I was getting it in my lessons, but I just wanted to make music, but I needed to go back and learn about the rudiments, and I then started to work in school on that stuff, and actually a classical percussionist started to work on rudiments with me, which was great to get that together. And then what came later for me was actually reading the music, like sight reading and learning how to read like a part for a drum set or um so then I started to in school I started to play in the concert band and do stuff like that and work on mallets and actually learning how to read music, which was challenging at first. I remember I just was wanted to like just learn everything by ear and play,
Hmm.
but I remember, Paul and my father and just saying, you've got to learn how to read. It's really important to read. That's gonna be a big part of being a musician if that's what you want to do. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, and it took a while. But yeah, so that's what I would work on my own, and just trying to get the rudiments together. I had a pad at home too, and I was just trying to figure that stuff out.
So when you learned to read, do you remember, did that change your approach to music? Do you feel like at first did it enhance your understanding of music, or did it
Yeah,
change and make you start thinking more analytically, or
that's a great question. I think that it just only enhanced it. I feel like I could get closer to everything that I was playing and feeling and before somebody might have brought in like a piece of music and say, let's play that. And I'd be kind of guessing, like, okay, is that where it is? I always felt like I was pretty natural at hearing like a form of a tune, but like there'd be like some kicks here and there, and I'd be guessing. And so when I figured that out, it was like, oh, I felt like I was really starting to get inside the music. I was really, so yeah, I guess there was a more of an understanding of like, oh, okay, well that's really what's happening here. And then I would try to figure it out really quickly and then try to get off the page as quickly as I could.
Hmm.
And we all know that's like the greatest feeling in the world when you know music by heart and you're just playing from just from here, just from the heart. And so I really was attracted to that and started seeing people come through Denver and playing and seeing what that was like, just know like a band, a whole group together, like just knowing the music and new music in front of them and just the experience of what that was like and how the music went to these levels that whereas if you're sitting there looking at a page, I feel like it's a little different. So
So I know you were really into Ringo Starr growing up, and
yeah,
then we already talked about getting into jazz music. Do you remember the first few jazz drummers that you were really obsessed with?
yeah,
And did you get into transcribing or copying by ear and that kind of thing?
yeah, absolutely. They're the first, I mean, the first few guys definitely was the biggest one for me was Jimmy Cobb on Kind of Blue, you know, because I was listening to all sorts of stuff at that time. I was starting to get into John Coltrane and Elvin Jones, who also blew my mind. But what blew my mind about Jimmy Cobb was here was this like music, and all he was doing was just playing quarter notes on a ride cymbal. But it was so effective, and it drove the band, and it was so powerful what he was doing that I think I was really sort of taken aback or just intrigued by the simplicity of what he was doing, yet how soulful it was. He didn't have anything to prove. It was just happening and it felt really great. And if it wasn't there, the music wouldn't have been the same way. So there was like this, I guess I understood it as he had this responsibility and and support that he was providing to the other musicians that I was very attracted to and was like, I want to do that. I want to provide that for somebody in a musical situation. And so that kind of really started it for me. And then, I started to think about Ringo and I was like, well, yeah, Ringo may not be playing all this flashy stuff all the time, but he's serving the music. He's playing exactly what that song needs, especially in my opinion. I feel like
Hmm.
some of
Hmm.
the grooves he came up with were just like, man, like that stuff is so deep and it's such an identity to the song. And so I got really attracted to that. And so I would start to sort of transcribe certain things that Jimmy Cobb was doing or Ringo or even Elvin. But I never really transcribing for me was a different thing. I never really like I would memorize stuff from listening to it, but I would never play along like completely memorized solos or anything like that.
Hmm.
There might be like a certain phrase I would pick up and try to play over and over again, but I wasn't somebody until I went to school, like in college, where it was like sort of an assignment to transcribe, where I really got into that. I was more into like what we mentioned before, like the emulating thing and just playing along and understanding what the language of like Elvin was and like how do you sound like Elvin? Like what makes Elvin play the way he plays? Well, he plays really behind the beat and he's got a lot of triplets always going on and Jimmy Cobb is pretty straight, Max Roach. Just trying to like compare and contrast a lot of these people. And then I heard Roy Haynes for the first time, and that completely
Hmm.
changed everything too.
Do you remember
And
what Roy Haynes record you heard first?
the first, yeah, and I think it was the same for a lot of people. It was the Chick Corea "Now He Sings, Now He Sobs"
Oh, sure,
record,
sure.
and I was just like, "What's going on?" It's just like, first of all, that's a flat ride. Wow, okay, that's a flat ride. That sounds really cool, and like, just he was playing so much stuff that I was just like, I got to figure out what this is. I want to. So I was just playing along, and once in a while, I remember I had to transcribe a Roy Haynes solo, and it took me a really long time. But yeah, I was just so focused on just like maybe not so much consciously thinking like, oh, I'm learning the language of this music. It was just more like, no, that's just by ear. Like, okay, that's what that is, or okay, that's what's happening. I don't know. And I'm sure for a while it sounded really chaotic when I would play because I was trying to consume all this information, but it was just so exciting, you know.
And when did you start to get into newer music? I know you said that from an
Uh,
early age you were into Kurt Rosenwinkel,
yeah, yeah,
and so if you're at home and you're hearing, what I assume is your dad's music,
right.
what led you into discovering new music?
Yeah, so I was in junior high school when I started to. There's a great record shop still there in Denver called Twist and Shout.
Oh
And the
yeah.
cool thing about Twist and Shout, is, I'm sure you know about it, but you could go in there and you could pick up CDs off the shelf and you could actually open them up and listen to them before you bought them. And so the way I kind of got into sort of like what was happening in New York, the sort of modern jazz scene in New York was there's a great label called Crisscross, and Twist and Shout used to get all of the Crisscross records in the store, and so I would always kind of go around and just sort of pick out a couple of names, like, oh, I don't know who this person is. Who's this guy? Ralph Peterson. Okay, cool. I'll check him out. Or like, who's this guy? Bill Stewart. Oh, he plays with John Scofield. Oh, I'm gonna check this guy out. And who's this guitar player with this cool hat on? Oh, that's Kurt Rosenwinkel. Okay, I'll check him out. And then one of the biggest ones from that time was Brian Blade. I saw the first Brian Blade Fellowship record, and I was like, wow, yeah, this guy, all right. And I heard that music, and that just, you know, so it was between that, going to that record store and just like people would either recommend names to me or I would just kind of like figure some stuff out. And then I had a great friend who was a few years older than me who had actually gone to New York. I was still in high school, but he was already in New York. He was already here studying, and he would come back during the holidays or in the summertime. And I just remember him just every time I'd hear him, he would just like get more and more of the stuff together. And it's because he was here and he was studying, and so we would hang a lot. And he'd say, "Oh, you got to check this out and this out and this out." And I just got a hold of all this music and just was checking all of it out. So I was very lucky to have that record store and to have my friend Michael Bailey, who's a great saxophonist, and now he plays keyboards and makes a lot of great electronic music. But he was somebody who just kind of like guided me on this path of like, here's all this stuff that you should check out and you might be a part of someday. And I didn't know that that was going to happen, but that was the goal, anyways.
Yeah, and it did happen that you got to play with
Yeah,
Kurt Rosenwinkel.
yeah, and that was like a huge goal of mine, actually written in an old like diary of mine or like an old book from school. Like I had a list of names of these guys I wished I could play with one day, and Kurt was definitely one of them. And I remember the first gig I ever played with Kurt, I told him that I was like, man, I wanted to play with you since I was like in junior high school, man.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so that was a really cool feeling, you know.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that yeah, I think your first experience playing with him was down at Loyola, right? With the
Yeah,
at the
that's
Monk
right.
Institute.
That's right. That's how I met him. Yeah, he came to work with us. And, because the administrators at the school said, you guys can select two people to sort of invite to come down and we'll see if we can make it happen. Of course, Kurt was probably my first and second choice. And yeah, he came down and that was great. It was just like a really cool experience being
Yeah, and
around
you
him
knew
and
his
playing his tune.
music and
Yeah, I mean, I just had learned everything he ever played or recorded, and of course I had bootlegs of music, and we started to play, and I was just so excited to be playing with him. And he looked over at one point, and I had my eyes closed, and after we finished playing, he was like, "So you're not reading the music?" And I was like, "Man, I just love this stuff." It was like, I know all your music. I'm a huge fan. It wasn't like, "Oh, I want to play with you. I want to be in your band. Please, please." No, I was very honest. I was just like, this music means a lot to me. And that was cool.
do you have a recording of that session?
Yeah, I do. And there's some stuff on YouTube, I think, of that as well.
Oh
But yeah,
wow,
I
I'll have to go
definitely have.
find that.
Yeah, maybe I can send you a link. But yeah, there is some recordings from the first time we played, and it was just super fun. And he asked me, he said, "Look, can I get your information?" And then it was like a few months later, and then we started playing together. It was really cool.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. That reminds me of something Kenny Washington talks about a lot is,
Oh,
if you want to play with somebody, know their music.
yeah,
Don't just
absolutely.
like them and
Yeah,
kind of
just
know their music, but know their music.
yeah,
And
learn
when the
it. Yeah.
opportunity comes and you're ready.
It's exactly right. And that's what Ralph Peterson used to say to me, stay ready, you know. And I hear it all the time. I'm a big NBA like basketball fan. They're always talking about like staying ready, you know, the next person up, like just and I tell my students that now all the time. I'm like, if there's somebody who really loves music and somebody you're really inspired by, just learn it and get deep into that. Like just you know, maybe the goal is just to know all the music, but you never know. You never know, you know.
So that leads me into wanting to ask more about your time in New Orleans, not just at the Monk Institute, but when you were down there, were you spending
Yeah.
time out in the community, checking out the local players? Because I didn't really put it together until I was listening to some of the albums you played on, and there's this song called Square Song on an
Uh-huh.
album called Bright Shadows, and I'll probably butcher his name, but Theo Capelidis.
Uh-huh. Right.
And that tune, immediately I heard the New Orleans influence in that groove.
Mm,
So I'm wondering if you can talk about the New Orleans influence that you got from being
absolutely.
down there.
Yeah, I mean, just being down there is influential in the music and but it was, you know, we were there in 2009 and when was Katrina? 2005, I
Five,
think.
yeah.
So it was not too long after and the city was still very much coming back and it was a but when we were in the Monk Institute, a big part of that program is going out, as you said, into the community and working with young musicians and going into the you know. So in Denver, I ended up going to the Denver School of the Arts, a performing arts high school, and that was everything to me. Not only did I learn about more music there, but other artists and what other artists do, like dancers and collaborating with people and playing in musicals and just like you know, getting to know other like-minded people that are dedicated to their art and what they do. And there's a great performing arts high school in New Orleans, NOCA, you know. And so we went and we got to work with a lot of the young musicians there. And um, at the time, there was this great young drummer there, Joe Dyson, who I don't know if you know Joe
Oh,
or
yeah,
not, but
yeah.
Joe is out playing with Pat Metheny now, and he lives here in Brooklyn. And it's just crazy to stop and think like there I was and we were hanging out together and he was so young and it's just amazing. So I got to really know a lot of local musicians. There Nicholas Payton was around and he's not only a great trumpet player, but he plays drums really well and got to hang and hear him play drums a lot and um, a lot of the local musicians and just like traditional New Orleans music going out and hearing like a second line or Herlin Riley is another great drummer that was around and you know we were really exposed and taught a lot about the history and the music in there and so I'd always been interested in that kind of music but like also Stanton Moore and Johnny Vidakovich hanging out with those guys and Brian Blade also came down and worked with us a lot
Mm.
and so we were getting, you know, just firsthand all this knowledge about this music. And so it's another, what was really great about learning about that music is it is very much a music like what I was saying when I grew up, like really wanted to learn it by ear and just experiencing it and playing along with it. Like I feel like that's the only way to really learn how to play that stuff because it's all about the feel and that sort of grittiness and laying back and just so just being there and experiencing the culture there, and a lot of people that were working for the institute when I was there were from New Orleans who had stories and sharing their experiences about Katrina too. I mean, like that changed everybody's lives that had been there forever. I mean, it was things were never the same, and that pain and all of that's in the music and sort of breaking through that and continuing on and having a wonderful life. And the sense of community down there is incredible. Just people really look out for one another and really love each other. And so, yeah, it's sort of infectious.
It really is. Yeah, it's a great city.
It is, absolutely.
So, what I want to ask you about now is kind of a deeper aspect of your playing. And I've heard you talk about it in the way of saying that the stage is a sacred place to you. And I get a really strong sense of how present you are when you're playing. I've
Mm.
been lucky enough to see you play a couple times live. I saw you at Ice House here in Minneapolis with Real Feels, and I think I saw you down at this little small basement club here called Jazz Central.
Oh
You were
yeah.
playing with John Raymond, and I think that was the gig that I had the courage to come up and say hello and
Yeah,
ask
I
you
think
about some of your music, and you showed me one
yeah.
of your pieces, which was really great, and I thank you so much for that. But I think of, especially when you're playing ballads and rubato tunes, you really hold the music, and
Mm.
so often when I listen to that kind of music or see that kind of music, there's a distracting element sometimes when all the musicians aren't in it. And you are one of
Yeah.
the very few drummers that can hold all of my attention, not just on, not just live, but on record too. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you got to the point of being able to be so present and hold your focus
Mm.
when performing that kind of music that I think a lot of drummers might be bored by because it's not,
Right.
drummy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, man. That's a huge compliment, and that's something I strive for in that playing, and I think that's really what it is consciousness, and something I think about a lot, and I discuss a lot with my students when we're talking about either playing like rubato or slow or um, soloing is to connect with your audience and not just be aware that they're there, but to try to really give something and let them be a part of the performance and a part of the moment. And so I think a lot of it I think comes from, or at least my approach is that I really try to think about um, the people I play for. And a lot of times when you're in an audience playing for an audience, like there might be some musicians out there, but there might be some people that have never been musically trained at all in their life or don't know really anything about music. And how can we communicate what it is that we're doing in that moment and connect with them? And so I think about that a lot. I think about like every note that I play, I want to have meaning and focus behind it and just life, and sort of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, being comfortable with sitting still somewhere and just playing a cymbal a couple of times, but just having that feeling behind it, like just making an effort out of each stroke, out of each time I hit the drum, like I want the sound I make and the sound that I'm getting from the drums to be really clear and balanced. And I'm also always asking myself, what does the music need right now? And it's something some of my teachers have said to me before: let the music come to you. And I was always kind of like, well, okay, but don't you have to make something happen in order for that to happen? And I've come to realize that the answer is no. It's like if there isn't something there, you don't have to nervously create it. And that's something I used to actually really be uncomfortable with space. Whether it is playing rubato or freely or like a small slow ballad, I always felt like I would have to like fill up all this space and time and just make sure that the the music had movement to it and direction, but it can without having to do much. And I guess it all relates back to what I was saying about Jimmy Cobb playing those quarter notes on the ride cymbal. That's all he was doing, yet he drove the whole band. And so I'm really just always trying to be really conscious as to what I am playing. And I never try to play any throwaway notes, I call them, where you just start playing something to get somewhere else. Like I want everything to be connected and centered, and I want to try to communicate that with the audience that I'm playing for. I want there to be a connection. And I think a lot of it is just the intention I set before I play. I always try to come from a place with a lot of love in my heart and openness and just wanting, setting an intention saying, I want people to, even if it's just one person or myself, to walk away from this feeling very positive and happy, or maybe taking someone away from some stress they had that day, and they experience this music, and it sort of changes their day for the better. And so setting that intention with the music and what I want, and then letting the music come to me, I guess, I think that's maybe where that comes from. I hope so, because that's certainly my intention.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about setting an intention like that before you even start playing makes me wonder. I mean, it doesn't even make me wonder. It makes me realize that this is much deeper than music to you.
Yeah,
And I've seen you post on Instagram about things as simple as trying to find a routine during your days when
yeah,
touring. And I'm wondering, do you meditate? I know you have started running recently. Do you use
yeah.
what kind of things do you use outside of music to keep you grounded so that you have the ability to follow through on your intentions that you set?
Yeah. Well, exercise is definitely a big one now, and it's something I've done a little bit in my life, but now I'm taking very seriously. And it only took 36 years to figure that out, how important that is. But it really has changed everything. I just did a 3 week long European tour, and I actually ran, I think, every day. And you're making a lot of sacrifices when you do that. I wasn't able to land in the city, and well, yeah, I was able to do stuff, but I decided to get to the hotel and go for a run 3 miles, and that certainly helped me remain focused. But I certainly have done meditating in the past. I was practicing Buddhism for a long time and still am,
Mm.
where I would chant every day. It's something that was introduced to me by an old teacher of mine, Joe Andres, who was actually that elementary school band director I was telling you about, who got me into jazz. And it's something that Herbie and Wayne are very into. They chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's a whole philosophy that has really helped me in my life. And but I really just see being a musician and being in this musical world, everything is really challenging these days. There's a lot of challenges out there. And being a musician, I say a touring musician, the job is the traveling part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Especially these days. I mean, we don't have to get into all of it, but it's really difficult to be a traveling musician these days, and to even get my cymbal case on a plane without having to pay a lot of money these days. And so I guess that intention is set every day, because it's like we go through all of this stuff to get to one place to play music, that if I'm not in the moment at that point and enjoying every second of what I do, and there's no joy, then there's no point in it. So I just, you could ask guys that I tour with. I tend to be a pretty funny guy. I try to keep things very light and entertaining, and it's just about, it's such an honor to be able to say that I'm a musician, that's what I do for as a living. And um, I just never want to take it for granted, and I always want to give something to somebody. And so I guess the better I can take care of myself mentally and physically, I think the better outcome I might have, and the better, the more clearly I'll be able to communicate these things, and hopefully it will well be received by who's ever chooses to listen. So that's the intention, is life is just to spread happiness and joy and love, and hopefully it comes back, and it certainly does. So that's
Yeah,
where
it's amazing that you've realized all of this at such a young age.
oh man,
It
well,
took
thanks
some of
man.
us longer to get there, and it's so great that you're there.
Thanks man, thank
And
you.
this leads me to a trivial thing I wanted to ask you about, but I did hear that you quit coffee.
Yes.
Are you still off of coffee?
Yeah, it's been 2 years now.
This
Absolutely.
is something that I think about every once in a while.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me just briefly? And I know this is trivial and it's not drum
No, this
related.
is really related to everything we've talked about, honestly. So,
Just like simply, how hard was it? What was your approach to quitting? And then what did you start to notice in the short term? And then now that you have
yeah,
some time with it?
it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't that hard, but I was in a pretty bad place with it, where I have a lot of friends that I'll call them very lovingly coffee snobs, where they, you know how it is with musicians, they have the best espresso machines, the best beans, and I was up to like I was drinking maybe 4 or 5 espressos a day, which was a lot. Um, and I suffered from a lot of anxiety and a lot of I wasn't sleeping ever really. I've always had trouble with sleep. And it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't really doing much. None of us were really doing much at the beginning, and I had just gotten back from Japan. I was in Japan, and somebody had given me all this really nice coffee, and so I was just kind of sitting in my apartment and just drinking a lot of coffee and becoming very anxious and didn't really have much to do. And I just said, that could be a reason why I'm not sleeping. That's probably why. And I would shake a little bit and I'd be practicing and just didn't feel good generally, and it wasn't just the coffee, obviously, but it was a big part of it. And so just one day, then and there, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try to stop doing this. And it's been 2 years, and it certainly is difficult. And this last tour, when you're not, you haven't gotten much sleep, and you got to get up really early, and I maybe missed it a little bit, but I don't think I'll ever go back. Honestly, I think I'm done. I feel really good. I don't drink that much caffeine, but I have a little green tea once in a while. But I don't know. I feel great.
Oh, that's
It was,
awesome. That's really inspiring.
oh,
I'll
really?
let you know
Cool.
if I decide to go for it.
Okay, cool. Right on.
And I do want to be respectful of your time, and I do have a couple other topics I want to hit.
Beautiful.
First, I want to ask you about your brush playing. Your brush playing is beautiful.
Wow, thanks.
I've heard it on record, and there's a couple of YouTube videos. One specifically that I really think was fun was playing at the Cornelia Street Cafe with Cécile
Oh, yeah, right.
and
And Gilad,
yeah,
yeah.
Gilad. Yeah, that's a great video, and I'm sad
That
that
was
that
super
club
fun.
closed.
Oh man, that was a hard one to lose. Yeah, for sure.
And then I also saw a video of you on Instagram. Gosh, maybe it was years ago now, but playing a ballad, just a snare drum, brushes, and then you were humming a
Oh,
tune. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how you learned the brushes. Did somebody teach you? What was your approach to learning the brushes and getting such a beautiful sound? And
yeah.
then your approach to practicing ballads and singing and
Yeah. Well, it's another really interesting topic because um I feel like I always really struggle with the brushes as well, like trying to figure out, especially being left-handed. Not that that changes anything, but whenever I would study with somebody, we would kind of be facing like this way, like the mirror image. So I would try to kind of pick up both hands, and there were a few teachers that would try to show me certain like patterns to try to use, and it wouldn't necessarily work. And then I actually started when I moved to New York. I started studying with Ari Honig, who I'm sure you're familiar with
mm-hmm,
Ari.
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny when you see, and if Ari hears this, he'll laugh. But he kind of looks like a crab when he plays the drum brushes. He's got his sort of index fingers pointed out, but he gets such a beautiful sound. And I remember I started to ask him. I was like, "So what advice do you have to get that sound?" And he was just like, "It doesn't matter what sort of strokes you're playing or how you're holding the brushes. All that matters is the sound that you get." And I was like, "Okay."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start experimenting with that. And I started to figure some stuff out. And then I took some lessons with Lewis Nash, who's another great
Oh, yes.
brushes player. And he kept saying to me, real estate, use all your real estate, meaning use really big strokes, like using the whole head of the drum, like really big strokes around
Mm-hmm.
using the whole head of the drum. And so that kind of inspired a whole thing for me. And so I may not have the best technique, but I just am always trying to get a really nice sound, where you get that sweeping effect with the brush. Um, but I always tell all my students, just like Lewis told me, use the whole head of the drum, use all your real estate. Like
Yeah.
the bigger strokes you can make, I feel like the fuller sound you get. And that's something that I do is I like to sit down and just sing ballads and play and work on with the metronome usually, but not on all 4 beats, like just a maybe beat two of every, because you can get metronomes that go pretty slow these days. So like beat two of every 4 bars or something and work
Mm.
on just playing really intentionally. And the thing I would say with my brush playing is I'm trying to get a lot of repetition in sound, you know. I want it to sort of feel the same way each time I'm moving around the drum. And so, yeah, that's something I work on with my students now. Is like I want it. It's almost like playing a backbeat groove. I want when I hear someone play a backbeat groove, I want it to be very, you know, you should try to get a repetitive sound out of the hi-hat each
Yeah,
time, and
very
you know,
consistent sound is important.
consistent.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm looking for that when I play the brushes, and that's what I'm focused on. And people ask me like if I keep the snares on or off. I usually turn them off. I like that
Hmm.
sound a lot more. And then I just try to watch people that I love how they play the brushes. You know, Jeff Hamilton's somebody who I'll just turn on some videos and check out just watching him, and he's got a whole thing going on. It's really cool, you know, just but that sound is always there. Just the sound is the most important thing. So however you get to, and it's changed a lot for me now. I used to play a lot traditionally, but now mostly I play match grip when I play ballads, and it's interesting the different guitar players I played with over the years, like Jonathan Kreisberg and Kurt Rosenwinkel. Um, and Ben Monder is another guitar player I played a lot with. All three of them feel ballads in a very different way, and so uh, having being able to adjust little things here and there, like one guy doesn't really want to hear like the swooshing sound or like the just more of a static sound, and just be able to adjust these three things or few things and not let it take away from the groove and the feeling of the music, but being able to adjust to certain things without taking it away has been a challenge, but that's really what I strive for. It's just always trying to create a beautiful sound
Did you,
if
when
I
you were
can.
first learning the brushes, did you record yourself a lot to make sure
Yeah,
that it was consistent?
absolutely. Yeah, I would record a lot just on my phone and or a mini disc player back in the day, and just or with back when the laptops you could start to record on them, and yeah, always just playing a little bit and then going back and just listening. And I use you know, I'm a Vic Firth artist, and I like the purple HB brushes. Those are
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I was
I
going to
like
ask
those
you
ones.
about that. A lot of
Yeah,
guys are sad that the Regal tip brushes have gone
yeah,
away
yeah.
and have been trying different ones. I tried the Vader brushes and
Do
they're
you like
okay.
those?
They're
Yeah,
okay. But yeah, the Vic Firth I think are the closest.
yeah. I would say so too.
So one thing you mentioned when talking about brushes is setting the metronome to maybe just beat two of a
Mm.
measure every
Yeah,
4 bars. And that's something I've also heard you talk about when working on odd times.
yeah,
Instead of click on every quarter note
yeah,
of a measure of seven, just even hearing the click on every odd beat
yeah,
every other beat, which ends up being the odd beat on the first
yeah,
measure and the even beat on the next, which really opens up the feel, I guess,
yeah.
and can help you develop a less angular approach. Is that something you still work on, or is that something that?
It is. You know, I like to practice time that way because I feel like it's really, I wouldn't say practicing time with the metronome on all the beats is a crutch, but it's certainly, I was about to say it's like training wheels, but that's silly. Uh, like on a bike, no. But it's sort of a safety net in the sense of like you're not going to lose your place. Whereas the more beats you take away and the more playing you do, I feel like you're feeling it in a bigger space of time and a bigger chunk. You know, you're
And you take on more of the responsibility of holding the
exactly,
time.
exactly. And so I think, and that's something I really strive for when in my own teaching is like, I want students to sort of practice time that way because, and I always encourage drummers and bass players to do that together because that's a really cool thing where you're playing swing maybe and you're playing quarter notes, but you're seeing where that beat two comes in, and you can sort of start to understand if you're pushing or pulling in between it. And it's just a really great way, in my opinion, to practice time. But and then move it around, move it to the and a three or beat four, you know, like
Hmm.
just constantly changing it up so that you're really starting to subdivide in your head, and it's just, yeah, for me it's been really helpful. I even do it when I'm walking on the street. Sometime I'll put on the metronome and just sort of subdivide as I'm walking and think about it. Because I feel like time is something we always got to work on, and I just like doing it. Or sometimes when I'm running, I'll put a metronome on, which is kind of crazy, but it's just fun to go through and subdivide things a certain way and just find what feels really comfortable, you know.
And you also have mentioned that you like to work on things that are really challenging and or really difficult. I'm wondering if you can give an example of what something
Yeah.
like that is for you now at this stage of your development, and then also where you find the inspiration.
A lot of times where I find the inspiration is just sitting down and improvising a little bit on the drum kit. Right now, one thing that's really challenging for me is I sort of try to create with my feet like a hemiola or a rhythmic pattern that I start to solo over openly. So, for example, I'll come up with a pattern with my feet, like let's see, what have I been doing lately? Where I'll play like a five pattern, duck 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 duck. So I'm playing that with my feet, and the hi hat will be like open closed open or closed open closed open. So but psh, but psh, but psh. And then I kind of try to solo on top of that while keeping the ostinato or the pattern going. And I'll work on just trying to play really freely on top of that, which is really challenging to keep it going and the tempo flowing. Or let's see, another thing I'll do is I'll be playing swing now on the ride cymbal, and I'll try to with one hand go through different subdivisions between the because I use like a snare, one rack tom, and a floor tom usually. So just three drums, and I'll be playing sort of swing time in the ride cymbal and going through those three drums and sort of playing quarter notes dot 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 eighth notes dot 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 so doubles dot 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 triplets with one hand and then sixteenths, which is really hard.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'll start really slow and kind of build it up. But what I'm doing there is I want my right hand, which moves around the kit, to have more independence with just the one hand and sort of create phrases. Something I saw Bill Stewart do recently. He's a monster at doing that. And so I've sort of taken a few things that I've learned from him just to experiment with and practice with. But that's the goal is I'm always trying to do things. There's another triplet exercise I do where I'll play triplets between my bass drum and my snare drum. Baku, 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 baku. And I did this in a couple videos. And I'll play a ride pattern, but now I've changed up the ride pattern. Instead of swing, I'll play this sort of 6/8 pattern, this da 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 da, and sort of go through and playing triplets with my feet and hands and so yeah, just it could be something really simple like that, just like okay, I'm gonna try to do this today, or it's maybe something I hear or see and try to figure it out, or a groove sometimes. But yeah, I always try to dedicate at least half an hour to an hour of just this is really hard, I can't do this, and
Yeah.
try to just get a little closer to be able to do it, you know.
That brings up a good point. How long do you practice on a
Mm,
normal session? Like if you're not on the road and you're home for a stretch, are
yeah,
you in for hours a day, or is that half hour kind of your?
yeah, so I just moved to this apartment and I've been very lucky that I can play here all the time, which is great.
That's
So
amazing.
I've gotten a lot of practicing time in these last 6 or 7 months. So if I've been home and not really even it actually works better if I have been teaching because I have some online lessons. So in between, I'll kind of practice. Maybe there's an hour in between or 2 hours. So it kind of varies, but I would say a couple hours every day of getting in, and then so that's great because it hasn't really been since college I've had like a lot of time dedicated just to sitting down and playing. And so, yeah, practicing is awesome.
Yeah, it is. It is. Do you
It's like,
practice on the road? Do you have any kind of rituals or
no,
routines with a pad?
not really. which I might try to do, but I'm really comfortable on the road with dedicating I mean, there might be a few, yeah, maybe a few days I'll actually on the pillow in the hotel, I'll play. Dan Weiss showed me some stuff, and or I saw him doing some stuff like just practicing rudiments on the pillow where there's not a lot of. I don't really bring a pad with me anymore, but I'm because you do a lot of playing and a lot of traveling, and so it's fun for me when I'm actually on the road to get away from the music completely. I do tend to focus on other things like watch some shows or something like that. But I'm not a big warm up guy, like, especially when you're doing that much playing. And lately I've had a few wrist things, which I'm okay. But so on this last tour, I kind of just during the day would take breaks, and just not do much playing at all. Definitely listen to music all the time, but
Sure, and you don't hit terribly hard either, where
no,
warming up is crucial.
no, no. Yeah, I mean, this last thing was 3 weeks, and I haven't done a 3 week tour in a long time where you're playing that intensely every night. I mean, again, not really heavy, but so there were a few moments where I was just like, wow, I'm really sore today. But that also could be just like yeah, I don't know, something. But it's all good. I know it's not like a serious issue or
Yeah, there
anything,
are a
but I
lot
was
of
definitely
variables with that too,
exactly,
sleep and hydration and diet and all of it.
exactly, exactly.
So I want to be respectful of your time, so I just have a
Cool.
have
Yeah,
a easy an easy wrap-up question for you.
great.
What are some underrated albums that you love that you think people need to check out? And
Mm.
or what are you listening to right now that's giving you a lot of inspiration?
I'm always listening to the Beatles every day. I'm always listening to the Beatles. Just love it. Rubber Soul is a great album. Maybe that one's underrated a little bit. I don't know if you could say any of the Beatles stuff is underrated, but I really love that album. There's some great grooves on there, great songs. For me, I spend a lot of time listening to. There's this younger generation now, and it's crazy. There's all these young people out there making such good music that I've been really checking out a lot of younger artists coming up. Like in New York, I'm always trying to go out and listen to younger people. There's this really great drummer, J.K. Kim. He's in New York. He's a bit younger and he's been out and playing. And I was lucky to hear him the other night. This really great vibes player. Her name is Sasha Berliner. She was great. Went and heard her band the other night. She's got a really young, great drummer in that band, Tim Angula. And so, yeah, I think that's really important. I know when I was coming up, there were some people I really looked up to that came and to gigs when I would play and be supportive, and I want to be the same to the younger generation now. So I spend a lot of time checking out younger musicians and listening to what they're up to. I mean, I could just list all of these great young musicians. Yeah,
Yeah, I saw a show at the Dakota here in Minneapolis a few weeks ago, Emmanuel Wilkins,
I was just gonna
with
say his
your
name.
friend Rick on
Yeah,
bass, and then Kwaku Sumphrey on
Kwaku.
drums. I mean, come
I,
on.
that's who I was just. That's the next person I was gonna
I
say.
was
Yeah,
blown away in a way that I haven't been in a very long time.
yeah. They're
Very
playing some
inspiring,
really
very deep.
inspiring, very spiritual stuff going on there, and just like really solid people, all of them. And yeah, Rick's been playing with them, and they're really inspiring. They're going to be, I think, at the Vanguard next week or something. So
Oh,
I'll
that's
definitely
right. I
go to
think
that.
the first week of May. Yeah.
Yeah, but Kwaku is definitely one of my favorite, if I can say, younger cats out there who I really like keep an eye on, for what he's doing, and he's a great djembe player as well, and like he's got a lot of really incredible stuff. So I definitely keep my ear to the ground.
Well, I suppose we should think about wrapping up. Where's the best place for people to follow you?
Yeah, I would say Instagram these days. It's just my name at Colin Stranahan is generally where I put most of what I'm doing up there, or list my gigs. And I have a new website that's coming soon, but I, yeah, mostly use Instagram these days. Yeah, I just hopefully there'll be some new music out there soon. There are a few records that I played on recently that are going to be coming out. I'm really excited about. One of which is this great organ player, Pat Bianchi, who actually I grew up playing with in Denver, but he's lived out here in New York for a long time. We just recorded his new record with Troy Roberts on saxophone, and that record's going to be coming out pretty soon. I'm really excited about that.
Oh,
We're
great.
starting to tour this week. Wow, I forgot. Yeah, we leave this weekend and go out and do some stuff. I'm excited about that. A new Stranahan Zaleski Rosato record, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, we're trying to plan for that now, and so doing a lot of traveling this summer. I've been playing with Kevin Hayes, great pianist Kevin
Oh,
Hayes.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
been absolutely wonderful. We just finished a tour on the West Coast, and there'll be some more coming up too. So yeah, lots to look forward to.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'll let you get out of here, but thanks again for doing this. It really means a lot to me.
Oh man, I appreciate it so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe on your platform of choice and share it with a friend. You can find the podcast at practicingdrummer.com or on Facebook and Instagram as Practicing Drummer. Until next time, happy practicing.